Hello, and welcome to the Product Experience podcast. This week, we're talking to Graeme Stuart, who is Head of Product at Aflac Northern Ireland. He's also the co-founder and co-organiser of ProductTank Belfast and a Mind the Product trainer. We chatted all about his 20 years in product management and how things have changed, and also how things haven't changed, perhaps when they should have.
Graeme, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks very much for inviting me.
It's great to have you here. We've got all so much in common. You and Lily are both Product Tank organizers or have been organizers. You've also been an MTP trainer, which I used to do. But before we get into everything else, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you first get into product and what are you doing these days?
Sure. So I did a software conversion postgrad course and worked as a test engineer in Dublin. And then I wanted to move to the big smoke of London. So I moved over to work for a startup, again, as a test engineer. And I did that for a while. And then I had basically what most people would have in product, where it was a lucky accident. So what happened was I was in a pub in Soho, and there was a bit of an altercation between the people I was working with and a lonely Spanish gentleman. And being 5 pints in, I was able to diffuse the situation because I spoke Spanish to the unfortunate gentleman, calmed the situation down, and our sales director came over and said, "I think there might be something more to you than meet the eye. I may have a role for you." So I thought nothing of it. And about 6, 7 weeks later, I was offered a junior product role, leading a new thing we're doing in Australia. So he saw the talent of being able to drink more than 1 pint and being able to speak another language. But I took it. And that's how I started my product career.
I think this might be my favorite origin story of all the episodes we've ever done, Graeme. Thank you.
I'd actually forgotten this story. I was trying to play it back and how it actually happened. So I did that. I worked in that startup, and it was the classic startup of you were expected to take risks and try things out and make stuff up on the hoof, and that's what we did. And then I moved to Ticketmaster, where I spent 7, 8 years leading their white label products, so many sports and arts, Premier League, Olympic, the Euros, and so on. And then life takes over, and we moved back with our 1.5-year-old to Belfast. And from there, I worked in a variety of startups, scale-ups in different industries, and co-founded ProductTank Belfast in 2016, because there wasn't actually a product community there when I moved back in 2012, so I felt a little bit lonely. So we set that up, and now I've been at Aflac for about 4 years and head of product, and for about 3 years.
Fantastic. So you have, like us, been doing this whole thing for a while. And it was interesting. I saw a post on Mind the Product the other week about how traditional product management might not work for, Gen Z, not like it did for those old stodgy millennials. But, I don't want to get into the substance of the piece, because we're obviously, we're not Gen Z. We're not millennial.
millennial.
We're
No.
something else. Okay,
Millennial.
Lily's millennial.
Millennials.
I'm just a millennial.
Okay, well, but we'll get into the substance of that piece another day, I'm sure. Graham, I wanted to ask you, you've been doing this for a while. How has product evolved over all that time? How has it changed over the years that you've been doing it?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I suppose there's several things we've changed and some things that haven't changed. But I think when I first started, it was very much a Silicon Valley thing, I would say. And a lot of the voices and leaders were from Silicon Valley, and they didn't necessarily look and sound like me. So at times I felt a little bit of an inferiority complex, I would say. But as times moved on, we now have a lot of voices from all over the world. In Europe, which has been fantastic to see that. Like Pedro Villa, and then we have people like an Intercom, with Des Trainer and Paul Adams. And it's great to hear those kind of voices. One of the things actually I love about your podcast and the product experience is, we've been hearing from leaders in Latin America and in Africa and so on. And we probably don't get enough of that in a lot of our product podcasts. So I would say that's one thing that's changed massively over that time. The availability of content and different types of content when I first started out, it was very B2C focused. And now basically you can listen to product people and speak about all different types of industries and different types of industries and companies and vertical. And that's also a big change. I would also say the availability of like frameworks and things like that. When I started in 2004, at times you were making stuff up within an organization. There wasn't like a standard way of doing things. Every organization kind of did the same thing, but not really, and there wasn't an industry best practice. So that's been a huge benefit. But there are some things that I feel haven't changed, and it's something that Randy and I were talking about, before.
So do you feel like if you're coming into product management these days, that the job is easier to pick up because there's so many more resources available now, particularly, I think, like you say, for different types of companies at different stages and in different markets?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say in some respects it is easier now because of the availability of best practice and ways of doing things. I would also say though could be potentially more challenging because I think the expectations are higher. I think the expectations were much lower when I started. So you could make a lot more mistakes and probably it wouldn't be noted, as much. So I would say though those are the kind of key things as well. And there's still a lot of competing, I'd say mindsets and approaches. When we have like things like scaled agile versus like empowered product teams and so on. And so I think that the variances of those mean that it's not easy just to take a practice from one organization to another. And where you may learn how to do product uh, will have a big bearing on how you end up doing it, as you move forward. So I'd say yes, yes and no. A little bit harder because the expectations are higher, but a lot more content out there, a lot more training out there, a lot more people to talk to who do product, which is a big thing.
And I think you and Randy had talked about like 3 or 4 different areas in which like product management hasn't changed and there is still a struggle. And I think the first of those was internal products and how they're perceived. So take us through like what your experience is with how product management is still the same with internal products.
Sure. So internal products, I would say, are still not hugely valued by stakeholders, and they, when I say internal products, I probably mean like the data products or the platform product or even the internal experience products that like an organization's member staff would use. So like a contact center or in our word claims specialists and so on. So I would say they're not fully valued, and some of that's down to the fact that they're still often seen as like the business versus IT the cost center piece. And I think that's where the opportunity is for people within those teams is the more they try and look at it from a, almost like from an external facing product. Now it's obviously different, but what I mean by that is things like looking at their cost model, but looking more holistically around their costs. If you're building a next generation platform to replace a legacy platform, being able to present the case for having the cost of the existing platform, what the cost of the new platform, what the maintenance cost is, including the cloud costs, how that's going to be, you're going to provide shared services, and you're going to help reduce the cost and overhead of the teams that are reliant on you, because again, speaking in the language of dollars, but not speaking the language of cost, kind of more around value around the organization is a big thing. I think that the second piece that would be having outcome-based roadmaps. It's probably one of the things I've seen in my career where you'll see a lot of outcome-based roadmaps for more experienced teams, but often the platform and data teams, they mainly have, an item by a certain date, with a Gantt chart. And some of that's because of like dependency management and so on. But because of that, they're not able to articulate the value and what they're trying to do. And one of the things I've seen be really effective is where like a data product and an experience product, they have a shared outcome. So if the outcome is realized on the experience product, like say a policy holder or and Ticketmaster would be like the fan website. Then if they both share on that, like success or failure, then that kind of makes it seem more like a less of a cost center, more of a like a a revenue generating product. So I think that's one thing. And on outcome-based roadmaps, you'll often have the outcomes and then you have the metric that you're targeting. So it's not just again about delivery of items. That kind of helps change the mindset a little bit. And then the final thing would be, I mean, kind of the obvious thing, which is UX is generally internal products are just not loved. They're not loved. They're not seen as almost worthy of having UX expertise, especially not at the inception. Often what will happen is our product will be launched and then we'll bring a UX designer in to almost like retrospectively fix the product, which is obviously much harder to do. So bringing a UX skill set and mindset in at the start, doing heuristic audits, usability tests, ethnographic research where you're walking a day in the shoes of your users. Because just because they're internal users doesn't mean they're not important. It's one of the things you'll hear a lot but they have to use the product. Well, yes, they do, but you want them to like the product, to be effective in using it, and so on. So that's still really valuable. So we've done some of the things with user research where we've used tools like Dovetail, and we stored a lot of that user research in that repository. And then what you can do is create show reels of things back to your stakeholders of where you maybe have like data issues or the experience of an internal product. And you complement that with dollar business cases, and then you hopefully end up with a really compelling story of why internal products are really important.
Graeme, I've been in these roles and I've run these teams before, so I feel your pain in this. I'm curious though, there's a lot of great stuff in there, so I'm going to ask you to boil it down to one piece of advice for a product manager who's doing that, and also for a leader who's got teams doing it. What's the one thing you would do as the product manager and as the product leader in that space?
So the one thing as a product manager, I would think it's the UX piece is bringing doing that legwork with your UX designer, and doing the user research, because when you start to tell those stories, and especially if you have a tool like Dovetail where you can it's coming from their own mouths, that kind of it's really powerful. As a leader, it's all about the dollars. It's all about the dollars, being able to communicate the value of what you're doing in dollars. But it's not just dollars in terms of cost within this individual area. It's like, how does that align with the overall organizational objectives? So that's partnering with all of your experienced product leaders and areas of that.
That's actually a really good transition to the next topic that we had talked about, which was, it's one thing to put together a business case, but to actually convincingly have the numbers for it, you need to have the analytics in place. And you were telling me that, you were surprised products are not as instrumented as much as you think they should or would be.
No, they're not. And maybe it's just my experience, but I don't believe it is just my experience, to be honest. And you would expect that with legacy products, but it also happens with brand new products that are being built now. It's just not the sort of thing that's often prioritized as part of the build. It's almost like the UX design piece we talked about earlier, where we'll get to that and we'll do it retrospectively. But if anyone's built analytic retrospectively, we'll tell you so much harder to do it after the fact. It's also really hard to build a business case to do it after the fact. Whereas doing it from the ground up, it isn't a huge amount of work, and it'll just be easier to maintain and iterate on as you go. We have a principle here where we say if it's worth building, it's worth measuring, and that's something we try to live by. We've a bit of work to do, but we're trying to live by that, and it's kind of really important. I would say a way to address that, if you have walked into that kind of scenario, one thing is to do an analytics audit, and that's like looking at tooling, capability, expertise, and so on, across the organization, and trying to find partners, who maybe are struggling against that themselves, because you're not going to solve this just as an individual product leader or a product manager. So you do need some partners. And then an analytics framework where you look at the type of analytics that you want to capture. And I've done this where it's just been like, it's been as simple as a spreadsheet, just a spreadsheet across the number of products and just the data points that you would like to capture. Now, the extension of that would be, could you use like a North Star framework, all the great work that John Cutler has done, where you try to identify the North Star for your product. And to do that, as you map that out, you often find the missing analytics in your product. So that's often a good way to find the things that you would like to measure, but you aren't able to today. Yep.
Graham, so what I find interesting about this one, and it's definitely not that I don't believe you at all, but I find it really interesting that this is a challenge because we have, much, much better tools when it comes to analytics and measuring and tracking and stuff like that. But yet, probably maybe it's product people like coming into product roles, don't necessarily have like data skill sets as a kind of core skill set. So is it potentially that's blocking us from thinking this way, or is it leadership? What do you think it is that's causing us to still deprioritize measuring what we're building?
Yeah, and if I had the answer to this, Lily, then I would be a lot wiser than I am. But I'm going to try and attempt to answer it. So, one thing I do see in organizations, it's not that there aren't analytics, right? You know what I mean? There are analytics in the organization. I will say that they're often very much like sales driven, cost driven, and they're often lagging indicators. There are more things that you would measure on a longer time period. So the organization does have that to help them make decisions. But I probably see the most of is we don't have analytics down at the lower level within a product. So the leading indicators. So for a team to understand if they're moving in the right direction on a sprint by sprint basis, that kind of thing that we often have missing. And I would also say to your question, this is really why I would say there's a lot of discussion around product ops, because often it's expected, and I've expected it myself, of product managers in their teams just to work this out. But often they can't, right? They're not able to solve this themselves, and there isn't maybe a centralized community of practice or center of excellence, to have best practice on how to do this sort of stuff. So I totally support why product ops has now become, more of a key thing for most organizations. Obviously, in theory, you shouldn't need product ops, but the reality is you do need some centralized capability to help with analytics. That's my experience.
Yeah, definitely.
This episode is brought to you by Pendo, the only all-in-one product experience platform.
Do you find yourself bouncing around multiple tools to uncover what's happening inside your product?
In one simple platform, Pendo makes it easy to both answer critical questions about how users engage with your product and take action.
First, Pendo is built around product analytics, enabling you to deeply understand user behavior so you can make strategic optimizations.
Next, Pendo lets you deploy in-app guides that lead users through the actions that matter most.
Then Pendo integrates user feedback so you can capture and analyze how people feel and what people want.
And a new thing in Pendo, session replays, a very cool way to experience your users' actual experiences.
There's a good reason over 10,000 companies use it today.
Visit pendo.io/podcast to create your free Pendo account today and try it yourself.
Want to take your product-led know-how a step further? Check out Pendo and Mind the Product's lineup of free certification courses led by product experts and designed to help you grow and advance in your career.
Learn more today at pendo.io/podcast. Graeme, you were telling me a story earlier about something you did. Northern Ireland is famous for its golf. So this was something related to that. Tell us the story.
Yeah, sure. So at Golf Now, we were building a responsive member booking experience. I realized this story ages me considerably, right? But let's go with it. So it was like 2014, 2015. So we were looking for a responsive booking experience, and we were going to build a mobile app to do that. Now, one of the problems was we didn't have any analytics, engagement analytics, to help us understand how people were navigating in and around the product, and also the type of people coming onto the product. So we did a quick POC and added Google Analytics into the product, which gave us some great insight. And one of the things that I had was I had an assumption that actually our admin interface, so not the golf members, but in the club pro shop, they also needed a responsive experience. Now everyone internally told me, that I was way off on this because it was all retired gentlemen working in the shop and so on. So they didn't want a responsive experience. So, but with Google Analytics, we were able to see that actually within the admin interface, so in the pro shops, the club shops, the average demographic was 18 to 24, East 18 to 24. And then when I shared this data back to our sales partners, and they were like, yeah, that's the assistant, that's the junior pro. They're the ones that spend most of the time in the pro shop. Now, that isn't what they told me when I first said we needed a responsive booking experience. But the demographics almost brought that out. And they were like, yeah, of course. So what that meant was we had potentially, a bit more of a business case on that. But it also actually gave us a thing where it helped us understand there were a couple of different ways to make a booking. And we had a real issue on deprecating functionality. We didn't really do it. So with this here, we have 3 different ways to do it. We were maintaining 3 and only 2 were used. So with that data, we were able to actually, make a case for deprecating that other piece of functionality, which wasn't something I'd set out to do, but it was an added bonus.
What are the things that you recommend for businesses that aren't doing measurement very well?
So one of the things around that is like changing how you select which problems you have to solve. I think it did in Marty Kagan's Transform book, or changing how you solve the problems. So one of the things is changing how you solve the problems, and that's the big part of that is experimentation. And it's not the only way, but it's definitely a big part of that. Especially when you have lots of different views on how to solve a certain problem. So doing experimentation, and that can be the whole way down the stack into like multivariate testing using something like LaunchDarkly or something like that there. Or it can be further back in terms of more the problem discovery piece. On the Strategizer testing business ideas, I think maybe one of the most influential books in the past 10 years within the product industry. It gives you basically a roadmap on how to do certain type of tests and certain types of scenarios. But not only that, it also tells you what you should do next once you've got the results of that test, then to do something else. So like things like the Concierge, the Wizard of Oz, the Letter Intent, and everything else. So if there's one book I would say that I would recommend every product person to get, it's definitely Strategizer, Testing Business Ideas. Fantastic.
Graeme, there was one more thing that you and I had chatted about earlier that I wanted to cover. And actually, you talking about the concierge test totally reminded me of it. So it was about organizational culture, but also tell us about your time in Paris and how that taught you about org culture.
So I worked as a bellboy in a hotel in Disneyland Paris, and I had a very fetching white uniform, very similar to Tom Cruise in A Few Good Men, if you've seen the film. So not sure I carried it off as well, but that was the uniform. So
I can picture it now.
I was going to say I had hair then. I'm not sure I did, but yeah, I think I may have had it. I had a choice. So I had a choice then. That was the difference. So yeah, what that taught me was the importance of culture. So, if you can picture where you're standing in the hotel reception, and it's just people from all over Europe primarily, some from the US. I'm watching how they all behaved with each other from their own nationality, and also then how they interacted with each other was just fascinating. It's like a sort of study in psychology and culture. So I'm gonna try not to speak in generalities, right? Because being Irish, obviously there are generalities of it being Irish, right? So I try not to speak about that, but there are obviously some traits in certain national cultures. But even within Disney, the people that work for Disney, they're kind of really bought in to the actual organizational culture, not just the nationalistic one. And even the most cynical of workers, of which I would include myself. So fast forward, many years when I was at Ticketmaster, they had a strategy of market expansion where they did mergers and acquisitions. So with that, you go into a similar sort of vein of them working with different cultures of people, and you would even see the organizational culture locally. So say if when we acquired a ticketing company within a European country, the culture of that company would be driven by the CEO, very much top down. So when you had a maverick type CEO, the culture of how they made decisions and how they did things was very different to maybe something that was a little bit more bureaucratic. And it was also something where you would take things for granted, especially in a product sense. So an example here is we had a white label product, and I was really confused and frustrated why our Finnish market wouldn't adopt this white label product for their sports teams. And one of our Nordic sales directors jokingly told me that Graham, they will go up to the saunas in northern Finland and they'll drink vodka and then they'll come back to Helsinki and they'll sign the contract. Now, whether this is true or not, it probably isn't. What it highlighted to me was that I didn't understand like what they valued and how they made decisions and how they interacted with their customers. And I hadn't bothered to go and do that legwork. I just assumed that because our product in my head was better than what they had, and that was enough. And it wasn't enough. I also didn't fully understand how dissatisfied or not they were with the current solution. I probably overestimated, how much they didn't like their current solution and underestimated what they got from it. So that kind of taught me a lot from a cultural aspect as well. And big thing about culture, I think, is understanding the history. How when a decision was taken, what were the little points in history that led to that decision? Because sometimes when you come in later, it's easy to judge. But if you don't know, you weren't there, you don't have the full context. And I think that's a really key part of it as well.
I think I've told this story before of I worked for a big British bank and here in the UK, and when American executives would come over, they'd pitch something and they'd walk out really happy, and I'd have to explain to them that you're not wrong and I don't disagree are not positive statements and they don't mean what you think they mean. So yeah, the communication, even with a common language and what you think is a shared culture, sometimes it can be really hard.
And thinking about in the context of like how product management has changed over the years as well. Again, this is something where I feel like, people should have learned how to work with each other better or how to understand each other's cultures. But I guess it's new people coming in all the time, doing that learning pretty much from scratch all the time. So yeah, it's the sort of stuff that we don't teach each other, but you just pick up through doing the job.
No, exactly. I think one of the things is it's like one of the big areas of advice I had in my career was make sure you go out with your salespeople, so you go and do ride-alongs and you go and see them in their environment and everything else. And you see the frustrations they have with the product, normally in your product area. And you also find out it's not as glamorous as what it seems. They eat a lot of food at petrol and gas stations, a lot of really bad food. So but you get more of an insight into their world. But like I did that when I was going to our new market in Europe. So even that was very different. Like just when you're in those environments, in those other cultures, you can see how they do interact very differently. I don't know if any of you have ever turned up to a meeting in Sweden where I turned up in a suit and I felt very, very overdressed. And I felt like maybe I was wearing my dad's suit or something like that, that kind of thing. So I didn't do that again because that's not what they did in those business meetings. But you don't know that until you're doing it. You start to get more of an appreciation by being there,
Yeah. I do feel like one of the things that has changed is that there's more of an acceptance of people being able to say like how they show up at work, and this concept of I don't know if you've heard of it, but like a me manual, and like this is how to communicate with me, this is how to manage me, and much more on an individual level than working with different types of businesses or things like that. But maybe this is the baby steps towards like having me manual for companies or organizations and things.
Yeah, I think that would be hugely helpful to do it with that.
Graeme, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It's been really great having a little bit of a walk back in time and a ponder over how product management has changed over the last few years.
No, thank you very much for inviting me. Long time listener, first time caller. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
The Product Experience hosts are me, Lily Smith, host by night and Chief Product Officer by day.
And me, Randy Silver, also host by night. And I spend my days working with product and leadership teams, helping their teams to do amazing work.
Luran Pratt is our producer and Luke Smith is our editor.
And our theme music is from product community legend Arnie Kittler's band, POW. Thanks to them for letting us use their track.